Hey buddy, I hope you're doing well. So let's talk about mediator design pattern today. Okay, so before going into technical side, let's take a real life example. Okay, now let's say you are working with an organization where only 4 to 5 or hardly 10 people are working, or maybe 20 people are working. Over there, communication is very easy. You need something, you can directly talk to management. You can directly talk to CEO, CFO, or any person from management directly. That happen, right? But if you are working in a big organization where thousands of people are working together, it's not easy to reach out directly to CEO or any person from management. Over there, you need one mediator, and that mediator would be your HR, right? So you send message to HR that I have this query. Further, HR people will talk to management, and they will clarify those query, and then they will reach out to you. So this is what a real life example that mediator design pattern is. Now let's go into the code and we will talk about more technically. So let's jump. Now let's talk little technical. Over here, let's understand these diagrams first. So in your application, there are 4 objects A, B, C, T. Now every object can directly communicate with every other object, and that is fine when your application is slow. But when it will grow, your amount of object, number of object will also grow, right? And to manage all those objects, you need to introduce that mediator, right? So over here in mediator design pattern, we are going to introduce mediator, but for sure there are different ways to manage it. But in mediator design pattern, you need to introduce one mediator, and here object A needs to communicate to object D, but now they can't directly do that. They need to pass message to mediator, and mediator will communicate to object D. Then it will return back to object A with that same message. And that is how mediator design pattern is going to behave, and that is why it is also called behavioral design pattern. Now when to use that, so that we will talk about when we write down our complete code, and then I will tell which would be the best application to go for this kind of design pattern. Okay, so let's talk about UML diagram, and we will implement the same UML diagram in our Visual Studio C# code. So these two things that you see in the top, these two things are the interfaces. The when you see that eye icon, that is something interface, right? So we have that click and mediator, two are the interface. And for sure, since this is a mediator design pattern, we would have something called mediator, and that is something this eye mediator, right? And colleague is a concept. Sometime if you will go and try to find out mediator design pattern, you will see some people are calling colleague, some people are calling participant. So they both are the same word, right? Now let's implement these two first. So this UML diagram may sound a little complex the way it is communicating, but we will do everything step by step. So first step, let's design our two interfaces. Let's jump into Visual Studio. Here we are. So I have empty those interfaces, I mediator and I colleague. So let's create first a I mediator. Okay, so what I need to do, the responsibility of I mediator would be just send the message, right? Okay, so let's say a public, and since this is an interface, so I don't need to mention that. I will say void, and then I will say send. And what I need to send? I need to send a string message, right? So let's say message, and then to whom I need to send. That object I also need. So I need to send to this I colleague, right? So let's go ahead and say let's paste it. I think I didn't copy the right. Let's copy again and paste. Here you go. And this is your colleague, right? So your interface for iMediator is good. Now design for a iColleague, right? So for colleague we need two methods. One would be send and second would be either you can call it read or you can call it notify. So I'm going to use some standard term. I will use notify, right? So what I need to do here, let's say void and I will say send, right? And now next either I could write get or notify. So I would prefer notify. So let's say notify and send what? I need to send string message right here also. So let's say message, and you know what, same, we have to notify the message. Okay, here you go. So iClick would have two methods, send and notify, but on the other side iMediator only have one method. Now you might be confusing that if I look at this diagram, mediator is communicating with object A and then it is returning back the message to object A. But in the Visual Studio we don't have any implementation of read. Then how it will work? So that is the interesting part. When we will done with our concrete classes, you will get to know that why iMediator have only one method, but on the other side that colleague have to send and notify both. Okay, now the time is jump to that UML diagram again. Now what, we need two concrete colleague classes. So if you remember, initially we talked about employee and management, right? CEO or CFO. So let's implement the same thing. Let's go to Visual Studio, and what, either we can create a separate file here or we can create separate classes within the same file to save some time. So I would prefer same file. So what I need a concrete class. So concrete colleague 1 and concrete colleague 2. So one would be my instead of naming concrete, I would name let's say employees or let's say engineers, and these would be managers, right? Instead of CEO CFO, I will call it managers. Okay, let's go there, and what, I will create one public class and I will call it manager. Come on, manager, what, this is my manager colleague, because everything is colleague here, right? And I will implement that with this iClick interface, right? So now not this one, come on. So I need to implement the interface. Here you go, right? So my implement is good, but it is still empty, so we have to fill this. Okay, now what, every colleague class, concrete colleague class, for sure dependent on mediator to communicate, right? So that means we have to inject mediator here. We have to put dependency over mediator. So what I will do here, let's create a constructor, right? So let's create one public constructor that would be manager colleague here. And what was our class? That was iMediator. So let's go there and put a dependency over here, this one, right? And over here let's create one backing field. So I would say public, this one iMediator, and what, let's say mediator and say this is my backing field, right? So let's, come on, right? So let's fill this stuff with this mediator, and we have assigned that. Now here you go. So for sending the message, I will say, what, I will say send to mediator. Now if you look at that diagram, every colleague is sending message to mediator, informing to mediator, right? They are not directly communicating with other colleagues, right? These are not communicating, so they need to inform to this mediator, right? So same thing here. So I would say this is my mediator. Let's change the name. Instead of mediator 1, let's call it better name, and that would be mediator. Now let's say mediator dot what, send. And send is what, the first would be for sure the message, so that I will receive in this send message, right? So let's pass that, and then this need one colleague class, right? So for here I would pass the same class. So I would say this person is passing this message, right? This person, which is this person colleague, manager colleague, is passing this message to mediator, right? So now this is done, but we need one more object to communicate, right? So what I will do, we'll create one more class. Let's just copy paste it here, and instead of manager, let's call them, let's call them engineers, right? So I would call them engineers colleague. So this is my engineers colleague, and rest would be same. Yes, and you know what, we missed one thing here. So we have to write down logic something to notify. So I would print down here console dot write line, and I will say that this message, and then I will say that so this is my colleague, right? Colleague, manager colleague. So I would say that let's say manager received a message. And what would be message? This would be the message. So either you can write down this, or you can simply say manager. In normally when you design your chat application and you communicate with someone, so you can see their name, right? So let's say just manager. Okay, now let's copy the same thing here and paste it here, and let's say engineers, right? So let's say engineers here. So engineers have received this message. Okay, so they are going to use to notify. Now let's jump back to that RUML diagram. This part is done, this class is done, this class is done, but we still need concrete mediator, right? Now here you see they don't have direct communication. Concrete colleague 1 and concrete colleague 2, they are getting implemented from this interface, right? This arrow that you see, that big arrow, this one, this is the implementation that denotes that this class is implemented from this, and these two classes are implemented from this interface, right? The same thing if I can show you. So these two class, engineers class and manager colleague class, are implemented from iColleague, right? But we still left with concrete mediator, which needs to be implemented by iMediator. So let's go ahead. So now what we have to do, a concrete mediator. So this needs to be implemented by iMediator, and let's implement this interface as well. Okay, now here the interesting part. You know what? So here this concrete would always need two different objects to communicate, right? So what we need to do, we need to register two colleagues, and that would be, let's say, public, and I would say class, not class. I would say what was that class name? That was interface, right? So that was iColleague. Yes, this one, right? And I will call it colleague 1 and get set. I'm going to declare it as a property. Then I need one more, that I would say colleague 2. Now I need to write down the business logic here. So what I need to do here, I will say, I will put a business logic, and I will say, hey, if this colleague that we are going to make a call, if this colleague that we are receiving is equal to colleague 1, then what, don't make a call to colleague 1, make a call to colleague 2 instead here, right? So this colleague 2, and say send and your message. Now so here is little confusing part, that if we are saying that if this is colleague 1, why we are making a call to colleague 2? So that is the interesting part, and that is the answer is because here when engineers will reach out to this mediator, concrete mediator, they have some message. Now they need to pass to other objects, and that would be manager object, right? So that is why when one object is making a call, they need to communicate with some other object. That is why you see they have different object, right? So let's say now else part, and else part I will say this one, let's fix the code formatting. So I will say let's copy this, paste it, and change it to colleague 1. So vice versa. Now okay, so let me repeat it again. If it is colleague 1, then colleague 1 need to communicate to colleague 2, because colleague 1 need to send message to colleague 2. So that is why we are making call to colleague 2. Else if otherwise, if colleague 2, then for sure it will make a call to colleague 1, right? So don't get confused. This is little confusing, but yes, that is the beauty of mediator design pattern that you need to remember. Now you know what else, what left, so let's go there. Okay, so now you know the implementation part is done, but communication is still left, right? So if you look at here, concrete colleague and concrete colleague 2 have no direct communication, but concrete mediator is making communication to this and then this also, right? So let's go and implement this part now. So let's go to the code, and you know what we need to do. So just need to, you know, call what we have implemented. So this is my main class, and what I need to do, first of all, I need a concrete mediator object, right? So 3 objects: concrete mediator object, this object of colleague 1 and colleague 2, so manager object, engineers object, right? So let's go there. Okay, so I would say this is, you know, a mediator, right? And I would say this is new, and let's say concrete mediator. Here you go. And I think that's all, right? And then you need what? Concrete mediator colleague. So let's say concrete you know what, the object name, let's say manager. Let's say manager is one colleague, and I would say now let's say manager colleagues. Here you go. And manager colleague needs what? They need a mediator, right? So no, not this, man, not this. So and if you look at this constructor, they are dependent on mediator, and that is why we have this mediator object. So we will pass it. Here you go. Now not this, let's copy paste, and here you would have, you know, engineer, right? So engineers or engineer, and here you need a, let's say, engineer colleague, and their 3 objects are ready now: concrete mediator, this one, then you know manager, and then engineer. Now how they're going to communicate? So for that, you know what, while making a communication, let's fix it. If you go to concrete mediator, we need to, you know, pass 2 different objects, right? So now here we have, so I will say, hey mediator, the first should be what? So let's say colleague 1 needs to be manager, that is good, and then you know colleague 2 should be engineers, so let's make it engineers. Okay, now so you know this part is done. Now it's time to send a message. So you know, let's say manager wants to send a message to, you know, manager wanted to send a message to, for sure, you know, the other object, which is engineer. Let's say, hey engineers, let's type a message. Let's say, hey engineer, right? And then engineer will say back, and they will say, you know, so they will say, hey manager. Let's say, hey manager, right? And then let's see what happened. You know, one thing that we did a mistake while implementing concrete mediator, we never made a call to that method notify, right? We don't need this send message in concrete mediator. Concrete mediator is just going to used for, you know, notifying each other, not for sending a message, right? So here, instead of send, it should be notify, right? Because job is to bi-directional communication, right? So it would be just notify, not send, right? So same thing here. So let's paste it. So this would be send, but here we will, you know, get a message whatever colleague 2 has received, right? So, and same, you know, vice versa. So that was the one mistake that we need to fix, and that we have done. Now we should be good. So I'm going to execute it, and let's see what happened now. So let's see, come on. Hey, come on, here you go, you see. Okay, so engineer received a message, and you know, they received a message that, hey engineer, right? You know, and manage, you know what, this is a little confusing. Let's modify our code. So this is kind of a chat application that we have built. So R1 is here. So let's say a message, or you know what, let's say message message received from manager, right? So manager will send a message to this, and you know what, let's change here as well. So I will say message received from engineer, right? So let's say engineer. Now that should be good. Okay, so now let's go to program class. It says, hey engineer, let's say, how are you? And in back it will return, hey, I am good. How are you? Right? So let's see on how it works. So now for sure it will work the same, but it will be more clear now. Here you see that manager send a message, and here say that message received from manager that hey engineer, how are you? That is fine. And then next message received from engineer that hey, I am good, how are you? Right? So this is what mediator design pattern is. So you can use a mediator design pattern and you are building an application for communication purpose, like chat application. Over there this design pattern is best. Or if you find a situation where you have lot of objects and you think that it's time to stop direct communication there because it is getting messy, right? So over there introduce your mediator design pattern. But as per my experience, I have always seen application where communication system is being built or message passing system is required. Over there we can design the mediator design pattern. Okay, so that's all for today video. I will see you in the next video.